Welcome to Sisters in Company Talking About It live show. Hosted by me, Dr. Sharon Cradle, and Sherelle Higgins. We will be discussing intriguing, intricate, inspirational, informative, and intelligent topics with our individual twists and talents.
We will present real stories, real solutions, and engage in real talk.
So we invite you to be our company every Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock p.m. as we focus on transcendent thinking that will move you forward. You become the company you keep.
What company do you keep? Oh yeah, we are biological sisters by way of the south side of Chicago. So get ready to keep company with us and our guests as we talk about it.
Welcome to Sisters in Company Talking About It.
You all have no idea. Any other time in the DMV, people are driving like maniacs, and I was running a little late, and people were driving so slow. But I made it here safely.
Praise
and
the Lord.
It's good to be here.
Yes, indeed. Won't he do it?
Yes, he will.
Right in the nick of time.
I felt like a race car driver trying to get here. I don't think I pushed that car that hard in many
I hope you
years.
weren't pushing that car through that 3rd Street tunnel, because they got all kind of speed traps up in there.
Well.
The actual police aren't listening.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah,
So-
you'll get a $100 ticket from that 3rd Street tunnel.
Yes.
So
Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in to Sisters in Company Talking About It live show. We're excited to be here. And one of the things I want to start out with, and this happens every week, I inevitably run into people who say, well, we watched the show and it was so good. The topic was phenomenal, but who was that lady who was your host? I said, well, that's my biological sister. And so, and Sherelle and I were talking about that, and I think someone asked you the same thing the other day. So we have to make sure that at every show that we're going to have to remind people that we literally are biological sisters. And I am Dr. Sharon Cradle, and I am the oldest of this dynamic duo.
And I am Sherelle Higgins, and I am your favorite co-host of this dynamic duo.
Yes, that's so funny. And people are like, you all are night and day. Yes.
Yes.
But we complement each other.
Yes,
and
we do.
That's the way it should be, because God
Absolutely.
created each of us to be individuals.
Oh, say it, sister.
And
Say
there was
it.
no one born like me.
Oh, what? And of course, we all know that when he did me, he broke the mold. He said the world could not handle more than one of her.
That's right. So we all know that today is Palm Sunday. I went to church this morning. It was wonderful. And just to kind of remind some people who may not really know, for Christians, Palm Sunday commemorates the entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem when palm branches were placed in his path before his arrest on Holy Thursday and his crucifixion on Good Friday. It thus marks the beginning of Holy Week, the final week of Lent, which ends on Easter Sunday. And our scripture for today is Deuteronomy 31:6. Be strong and of good courage. Fear not, nor be afraid of them. For the Lord thy God, he is it that doeth good with thee. He will not fail thee nor forsake thee. And the reason I picked that scripture is because you all see these beautiful ladies sitting here. We're going to introduce them in a second. I think about they are attorneys. And so I'm thinking, be of good courage and be courageous, because I can only imagine being attorneys and being black females in the field that you all are in, that you have to have some courage to do what you do.
Amen.
Exactly. So let me just tell you all something. Everyone who is listening to our voices, please go to listenvisionlive.com so that you can view the show in its entirety. And of course, you're going to want to call in today, because I believe that what we're going to talk about today, everybody can relate to. And the number is 833-202-TALK.
Yes. So as you can see, we have two people here with us, two ladies, because Black girls rock,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And we're gonna ask them to introduce themselves, tell us what area of law they focus on, what law schools they went to, what undergrads they went to, and then before we go any further than that, we're gonna take a few minutes and talk about how the orange and blue dominated not only the CIAA but the NCAA.
That's right. Yeah.
So, okay, let's start with Eden. Eden, why don't you introduce and tell our audience who you are?
Hello, everyone. My name is Eden Brown Gaines, and I am actually born and raised in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
But I relate to these ladies because my family is from the Midwest. They are from Indianapolis, Indiana, and Chicago, Illinois.
Yes.
I practice law in the area. I own a boutique law firm. We represent primarily federal government contractors who participate in the socioeconomic programs. But from my background, when I first began practicing, I did a lot of civil rights work. So we still maintain a civil rights practice where we mainly represent employees in employment discrimination cases. But we do a variety of civil rights oriented work. I'm very happy to be here. I'm happy to talk about the struggle because I don't think it should stop. I think our country is in crisis, and I don't think things are going to change unless we continue to push it. So I'm happy to continue to promote that. I'm happy to be speaking from a platform with these wonderful women who speak to empowerment every week and who talk about how we can change our lives for the better. So I'm happy to participate in that. I attended the American University's Washington College of Law here in D.C.
Yes.
I hope we don't have to talk about years when we graduated.
No, you don't.
It might have been a minute ago. I'd like to think some of the struggles I face in courtrooms is because I still look so young. It's probably not that.
They underestimate
Right,
you.
is that what it is? Right. And as Sherelle mentioned, my undergraduate education was at none other than the home of the NCAA national champions in basketball, the University of Virginia.
Yes.
Wahoo wah. Yeah, so who's your lawyer?
I love it.
So in sharing our gratitude to God in Holy Week, I just, not even a little bit, and thanking the Creator for bringing us that national victory, because the only way, as many of my friends have stated, to come back from what happened last year was to win a national championship. And as all of my brothers and sisters at the university will say, we did that. So here's my chance to say a congratulations to Tony Bennett, my good friend, Jason Williford, who's also an assistant coach on the team, who graduated in the class of 95 with me and who has led Virginia for many years. And I'm so happy for his professional achievement.
Yes.
So go Who's.
Okay, the orange and blue has spoken, right? Melinda.
Run first. Good afternoon. I'm Melinda Holliday McDonald. I have been a federal government attorney, I guess, my entire career. I prosecuted in D.C. for 2 years before going to the federal government. I spent the bulk of my time as a, law enforcement attorney in the Inspector General community, and my specialty sort of developed into employment and personnel law. I went to George Washington University Law School here in D.C., and I'm not a hater, but I went to Georgetown, Hoya, Saxon. No, we were not in the NCAA, but we have won before. So this year was not our year, but the blue and red will be back.
Yes.
They got blue.
Right, we'll go with that.
But I'm happy to be here today to discuss employment. I have been on both sides of the table, so I think it'll be an interesting conversation.
Yes.
And I just thought it was so appropriate to have these ladies here today with the current political climate that we're living in. And as you all know, Sherelle and I both work in the HR field. And so just to kind of imagine what's happening out here and just the type of cases that are starting to pop up over time. And so I just think it's so important to have this conversation and for you all to walk away with some nuggets in terms of, things that you need to look out for and things that you need to do to protect yourself in the world of work.
Yes. So Melinda and I met in the workplace. We were definitely the dynamic duo in that workplace.
Yes.
She was doing employment law, and I was the HR director. So yes,
I know that was interesting.
And we used to walk with Eden at lunchtime.
Lord have mercy.
So we would strategize, right? And we became a dangerous force. So much so that they were afraid to hire me at the place where Melinda works now.
And they're still paying the consequences.
Right, but
Yes.
I'm still helping them out on a daily basis because I'm nice like that. So let's start. So Eden, tell us how you got into practicing your field of law.
It's somewhat of an interesting story in that I attended Oxon Hill High School here in Oxon Hill, Maryland, which is a science and tech school. And I was a part of the science and tech program. So although I think I grew up with just a good internal sense of fairness and justice, and my parents had instilled a sense of consciousness as a person of color in me from early on. My mom used to give me the poetry of Gwendolyn Brooks and Langston Hughes, and I'd read books from the Harlem Renaissance. So my mom made a point of making sure that I understood whose I am in the spiritual context, but also who I am in the context of this country. But I went to a science and tech school, and I thought I wanted to be a pathologist. And I had no idea that they just wore scrubs to work every day, so that would have never worked. At the time, right. I don't know how I was going to cut mine up or bedazzle and add my heels to them. But I wasn't aware of that then. So when I started at UVA, I started actually as a biology major, and then I faced chemistry. And then when they wanted me to do some things to some live animals that I just couldn't, I had decided that maybe I should change my direction. So I went to the English department because I enjoyed reading and literature, and to the philosophy department, which speaks quite a bit to morality and how our laws have developed. And I decided I wanted to go to law school. And I actually have family. My mom got her PhD from American University, and we have other family members who've gotten done their doctoral work at American University, but it's well known as a public interest law school. It was actually founded by two women, and it has a point of international law, but also of social justice. And so when I graduated from law school, my first move was to Birmingham, Alabama, where I worked at a firm and that did civil rights work and saw some things that I hadn't imagined could have been possible at that time. But I mean, it just impressed upon me that people need help. They need advocates. They need voices. They need people who will commit themselves to studying and understanding the way the system works, who aren't afraid to push against it. And I just figure that that's my lot in life. Sometimes I get tired and I think that God keeps sending me people because he wants me to help them. But I mean, these are the gifts and the talents that he gave me, and I just figured that I should use them, in order to support people who tend to be marginalized in this country, which includes people of color, women, people of various religions. And I just have a fire in me. I mean, if someone writes a law and says that this is what America is supposed to be, then it's our responsibility to make sure that that's what America is.
Yes.
And we have people who want to diverge from that, push away from it, walk away from it. And we're going to fail as a nation if we don't stick to our code, our laws, our sense of morality, a sense of equality for people, regardless of their race, social economic status, what have you. So I just feel that I'm not sure that I could do anything else but, support the people in the courts of our law who need, advocacy and assistance.
Okay, so Melinda, tell us how you got into employment law.
Oddly enough, somewhat similar but different. So I actually, as a child, wanted to be a police officer. And then my father told me that our family was on the other side, and I didn't quite understand what that meant. And so he told me he didn't think that'd be a good idea. That's a peculiar statement. And said that the family could use more lawyers. I was like, I have no idea what that means, but okay. But then went to school and was actually myself in a science and math program, and so all of my teachers thought I was going to medical school, but I knew that I wasn't. I didn't want to spend my college years in a lab. So my uncle on my mom's side had been a lawyer, and so I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll go to law. My father told me we needed more. Much to his disappointment, I didn't end up on the side of the law that he had wanted me to end up on. And I thought I wanted to be a federal prosecutor. And after spending 2 years in DC Superior Court, which I now dubbed the farmhouse, I was like, well, this is not for me. And so I just started looking for a job and landed at a federal agency doing law enforcement, kind of by happenstance. And because I had done litigation work doing child support, the deputy at the time asked me, would I be interested in employment law? Had never really taken much of an interest. And I said, for sure. It gave me the ability to still sort of do court stuff without having to do it every day. And literally, it kind of just stumbled into it. Though, oddly enough, I think I ultimately ended up where my dad wanted me, although I don't know that he would agree with me, because I take my responsibility in representing sort of an agency, not to just advocate on behalf of the agency, but make sure that an agency is doing things the right way. And so oftentimes people see us federal attorneys as, oh, you're for management. And I'm saying, no, I'm for the government. And the government has an obligation to treat employees fairly, but also to hold employees accountable.
Right.
So I think I ended up on the side of doing my part in preventing employees from being mistreated and discriminated against, at the same time holding people accountable to do the job that they're supposed to do.
So how did you all end up in the federal government?
I ended up there by happenstance. Like
Okay.
I wanted to be a federal prosecutor, and when that was not working out of DC Superior Court, I literally just went on USA Jobs and
applied.
Probably sent out 60 resumes, and the first offer I got, I took and never looked back. 18 years in now, I'm wondering if I should have maybe looked at a couple of firms, but that's a whole different story.
And you, Eden?
Well, the federal government was the last job I had before I left to start my own firm, and I will say that it was actually one of the better jobs that I've had in terms of the people who I worked for. It was my first opportunity to actually work closely with another African American female, who is of course now my very good friend, but was a mentor to me. And I got there because they were looking for an attorney who could do class action work. So early in my career, I had done class action work when I started in Alabama, and then when I came back, I worked for the NAACP for a short stint, and then I worked for a firm that did class action work in D.C. And so I happened onto the job because, to be honest, I was a little tired. I was traveling too much at my private firm, and I wanted to stay local. That didn't actually end up happening at the new job, but that's how I got into the federal government. And it was a fantastic opportunity because having been able to work in the private sector for the government, also in the nonprofit world, and then, for a firm for myself, it gave me, a good vision of different sides, of the coin. So I enjoyed my federal service. We met a lot. There's a lot of meetings in the federal government. I was like, when are we going to get the work done?
So let me ask you something. What type of advice would you give, people who are considering becoming an attorney and going to law school? What are some nuggets they can walk away with in terms of your experience and what they can possibly expect?
Well, I mean, we have a sliver of, I think, what it is to be an attorney. There are so many different disciplines that one can do as an attorney. And to be quite honest, when we talk about the political issues in America and the structure, there's so many different ways to attack a multifaceted problem. There's a multifaceted approach to it. And so, I mean, people, I think, should do what they're motivated most to do. Whatever the good Lord puts in your spirit, the talents that He gives you, where you see yourself working collectively and collaboratively to make a difference is what you do. I mean, the basics for going to law school are just making sure you get into an undergraduate program, a good program, that you get good grades, that you perhaps pick a major that requires quite a bit of reading, and maybe even some reasoning. But I mean, there are even scientists and engineers who get into law school to work in the intellectual property sector. So, I mean, some of making a change is about just basic advocacy, but sometimes it's about understanding how commerce works, or capitalism, or having access to money, or having access to power. I mean, so there are just so many. I mean, there are people who end up on the Hill, working in Congress, or wanting to become legislators, or people who work for the companies, and the companies drive so much that happens in America. So, I mean, you could go to any law school, you know, in any kind of way, and it's really just about the discipline that you have to have and making sure you get the best results out of it, that you absorb the most and that you do the most while you're there so that you have the opportunity to pick the sector that you'd like.
And also, before we get Melinda to speak, you know, I don't think I would live this down, but Melinda is my soror, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and she just actually went over with 73.
Yes.
It's from our chapter in spring of 2018, and so that's a big deal, and so we'll talk about that later. But you know, welcome my soror. Yes.
My advice would be, you know, it's interesting. Hindsight is 2020, and I think one of the things that I never really had in my early career, and never really had anyone sort of impress upon me the importance of that, is good mentorship.
Oh goodness, yes.
I think,
yes.
especially being a minority, when you are the first, and I wasn't far from the first in my family to go to college, but I think the first to do it sort of at the level that I did it, you know, the type of school, the type of profession. And my family didn't really sort of teach you about mentoring and partnering with good
Right.
people who could give you advice along the way. It was study hard, get good
Yes.
grades, you'll get a good job. And
Yes.
that is so not the way that it works, right?
That's a part of it.
Right,
that's a
that
part
is
of
such
it.
a small piece.
Right.
But, you know, one thing that America, you know, has taught us, it's all about who you know. And so, you know, I tell any young person going in, you have to make sure and partner with the right people. You know, not jokingly say this, but I also truly mean it. You know, meeting Sherelle, she has become a mentor for me because Sherelle is a phenomenal manager. And I have taken so many, I have, you know, as I recently became a manager myself, I've taken so many of my cues in how I do things from the way that Sherelle does it. I'll never forget, I had an employee I had to have a conversation with, and I called Sherelle and I said, well, this is what's happening. And she says, call me back when you're ready to write her up.
Right.
And I was just like, oh, wait, we need that. And she's like, no. And let's just say that once I took that method and approach, I whipped things into shape very quickly. And so had I not had, you know, a mentor that I could go to and say, okay, this is what I'm dealing with, what should I do? I probably would still be fumbling through that process. So even though I'm an attorney and Sherelle is not, and where I am in my career, she is a phenomenal mentor. And so what I would say to anybody who wants to get into the field, find your people that you trust, who will be honest with you along the way. Because I think if I could do it all over again, that would probably be the one piece I would do different.
Right, and I would say that advice goes across the spectrum of
Absolutely.
occupations.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things, you're right, that we don't necessarily understand when we're going into our careers, that the value of having a mentor, you know, someone who's been there, done that, who's willing to share with you and advocate for you, right, and open up those opportunities for you and get you to think a little differently about how you're approaching the world of work. So I think that advice is good for everyone.
And most importantly, be honest with you.
Yes.
You know, it
Oh,
has
yes.
to be somebody where that trust is there.
Yes.
That you know when you call them, they're not just going to say what you want. They're not going to say what you want to hear.
Right.
And so you need to make sure that whoever you connect with on that level, that they can be honest and open with you.
Right, and so if you want to call into the show, the number is 833-202-8255. And now we're going to shift and really kind of talk about, you know, what was like the type of case, your first one that you engaged in, and kind of talk to us about how has the type of cases changed over the years in terms of you all being attorneys, or have they?
The very first case that I remember having, because it was a minute ago, was what we call a Bivens action. And that is the kind of lawsuit, it's called a constitutional lawsuit, where you're suing in federal court because of a violation of one of the Bill of Rights, one of the amendments to the Constitution in the first 10. So mine was an Eighth Amendment Bivens action for cruel and unusual punishment. My client was a young man who was actually from the D.C. area, who was probably in his early 20s, and he had been imprisoned under the crack cocaine sentencing guidelines with a mandatory 10-year minimum. He had, at the time that he was 18, he had gotten in with a crowd and gotten caught in a DEA sting selling crack cocaine. And so he had actually been processed through maximum security prisons, And because he was a young man, he hadn't been in trouble before that, even though he got 10 years without a prior record.
Right.
He ended up transitioning to the Maxwell prison camp, which is on Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. And he actually had a sister who was very involved with his life, even after he went to prison, and that was critical for his survival and his future. He actually had finished high school in prison. He was taking classes at Troy State University in Alabama. He ended up actually getting an accounting degree while he was in prison, but he had cancer. And the tumor was growing, and he had been complaining about the symptoms, and the prison, the guards, and the administration refused to get him medical treatment. And his sister, who was a nurse, got involved and told them that she believed what he had was cancer. What he was complaining of was a colorectal cancer, and they thought that he didn't want to work, that he was being lazy. He began to lose weight. He began to waste away. He began to show more severe signs of cancer. So ultimately, he had to have a surgery where his colon could not be what they call reanastomized or put back together to his rectum. So he ended up with a permanent colostomy, which is the bag that reroutes the waste on the outside of your body because it can't pass naturally. So in his 20s, he ended up in this situation because he had been in prison and he couldn't get access to medical treatment. And so we ended up suing under this action. It taught me a lot because it gave me an interesting perspective. Everybody thinks that everybody who goes to jail is a terrible person. And I don't remember what I thought then, but certainly this is a young man who taught me that there's so many different facets to that circumstance and what happens. He actually ended up getting out of prison. We got a settlement for him. He ended up working as an accountant. I've since lost touch with him because it was so many years ago, so it was a good story. So, I mean, it was a civil rights case in the sense that this was somebody who was in prison who couldn't get access to just basic medical treatment because of the way we treat so many people in prison, but disproportionately our African American men, in a way that changed his life permanently. And I would say that the law has changed from that case because ever since then, the Supreme Court has worked feverishly to make the Bivens theory smaller. It used to be a concept that it applied to any, constitutional right, which principally involved the Bill of Rights, and now they've narrowed it to it only involves certain amendments to the Constitution. I believe the Fifth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, and I think maybe the First Amendment are the things that they've said from 3 cases are the only things that it applies to. Like the 14th Amendment is your equal protection.
Right.
It also has a due process component to it, and they have excluded that from Bivens applicability, which is kind of technical, but I think it's demonstrative of overall how since I've started working, the Supreme Court, and not just the Supreme Court, but mostly the circuit courts and the district judges across America have worked feverishly to basically dismantle the civil rights laws and protections that came out of the 60s and 70s. And that's what I face mostly in my practice is just these constant challenges to what the law, on the books pretty much says. When we keep talking, I can give an example of a case that I had that was perfect for that. But to answer your question, the law continues to drive towards taking away people's civil rights, especially when it comes to women, to certain religions, and to people of color. The best discrimination law, I used to joke and say when I was living in Alabama, is when it's brought by a white person. Then you actually might get a decent case. But, those are so few and far between. So, that the law is constantly on this kind of like push to make sure that what's on the books as far as our rights are concerned is whittled away at until it's almost meaningless.
Yes. And Melinda?
I prosecuted child support cases right out of law school, so I don't necessarily remember one particular case, but I think, doing that for 2.5 years, what it taught me was that a huge aspect of what the practice of law would be, I did not prepare for in law school. And there's really an element of social work that goes into being a good lawyer.
Yes.
So for 2.5 years, I sat in a very tiny room with people who were extremely angry with each other, purportedly over money. And oftentimes it wasn't about the money. Oftentimes it was about a bruised ego, an ended relationship, a new girlfriend, a new boyfriend. Rarely about just the underlying issue of money. And and so it was difficult. I wasn't prepared. I didn't want to be a social worker. I didn't know anything
Right.
about psychology, but I had to sort of figure out how to tap into sort of that emotional side to get to what we were there for, which was to come up with a support order. And I remember thinking, I have no idea why I've landed in this job. It's hell. I don't have these issues in my life. Why am I here? But I will say that I think it prepared me for the career that I now have that I didn't know I would have.
Yes.
Because a huge part of employment law, regardless of what side you practice on, is listening. And being able to be empathetic and being able to see both sides, being able to understand, the employer side for whatever action they took, and also being able to understand the employee's perspective. So, I think for me, that was sort of the biggest lesson right out of law school for me, was that when you go to law school, it's not just about how fast you read, how well you analyze. It's about how empathetic you can be, and to really care about people, because most of your cases, obviously, at the end of the day, involve people.
And one of the things I know from being on the HR side is that there's a lot of talk, and we know that this conversation has been around a long time, but it seems like it's increasing in terms of diversity, equity, and the inclusion. And most people try to put it all together, but they're kind of separate things. And so when I'm thinking about your particular, both of you actually, your specialty in law, I'm thinking that, you there for management, but you're also there to keep management out of trouble, right? And to have those conversations with management about, what does the law say? We always talk about the spirit of the law and, and all of that, and you all are more versed on that. But have you seen, particularly from the EEO side of the house, many more cases being filed due to the lack of diversity or discrimination because of race, religion, gender, et cetera?
I don't know if it's more. It's just always been quite. There've been a lot. I mean, it's a constant stream where the courts are clogged with a number of discrimination cases. So, I mean, in the federal sector, you just get quite a bit, because people think that the EEO method is the way of resolving like the conflicts or the issues that sometimes arise in the workplace.
Yes.
But on the other side of that, I mean, there's quite a bit of discrimination. It just looks different depending on where you are in the country.
Yes.
I mean, when I was in Alabama, I would have people who trained the son, the grandson, and maybe even the great-grandson, and where the N-word was used in the workplace, and I'd look at my clients like, that wasn't a fighting word? Like, that didn't break out in fisticuffs when you said it too? Yes. And then here, it just looks different. It's sometimes it's microaggressions.
Yes.
Sometimes it's, the woman isn't supposed to speak in the meeting.
Right.
And, when you look at things statistically, when you see what people are paid, when you see the benefits that they have, when you see how they're treated, when you look at that across the scale, you can still see, trends and discrimination based on, race and gender.
Oh, yes.
And I think our president has made religion, more prevalent in a way that I probably hadn't noticed it in the past. But I think there has, perhaps if there's any uptake, it may be in kind of like it sometimes comes up in a national origin case.
Yes.
But I mean, the hijab, or, the leaving for Juma on Fridays, or, things that are associated with Islam, the religion of Islam. You see a bit of that coming up more.
I think I've seen also an uptick in retaliation.
Retaliation,
spans all races and genders, and
Yes.
so when it can affect certain individuals, it gets more attention. So it's just not a black person or Hispanic person filing a discrimination complaint, right? You have a lot of white men filing retaliation complaints. And so there was a recent change in the law with regards to protecting whistleblowers. And so I think you see there's an uptick in that. But I also think that there's a lot of cases that don't get filed. I think typically your highly professional, highly successful, highly performing people just walk away.
Yes, they do.
And so I was talking about this the other day, saying that, I think one of the unfortunate things about a big bulk of the EEO law is that they always sort of talk about the person that files the complaint and their background and what their misdeeds were. Were they not the best performer? Did they come to work late? The reality is that those of us that are good performers go to work and do what we do. I'm employable. So instead of staying fat and fight, we go find another job.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I think if those people also filed, I think you would see a bigger volume of EEO complaints.
Exactly. Yes, one of the guests asked me, not a guest, but one of our listeners, she said, can you ask them about age discrimination in terms of, are you seeing an uptick with age discrimination? Because we know, and I even had this situation on a former job where people came out and said, we want to hire younger people. We want to make sure because they bring certain skills. And I'm thinking, do not say that out loud, And so do you all see that,
yeah.
rearing its ugly head a little bit more?
No, you see that quite a bit. I mean, I think that's also been consistent as well. The interesting thing about age discrimination is that it's often tied to the economics of a way a business operates. So you tend to see age discrimination discussed in terms of retirement. What does our workforce look like? Who are the more expensive employees based on their years in and years of time, and where we need to shave? Like, is there a way that we can lighten our financial load? And that typically points to an older workforce. And conversely, a younger workforce, when you're thinking about what are the basic and minimum skills that we need in order to get this job done.
Exactly.
And we want to employ younger people because they tend to be able to or more accepting of lower salaries and lower rates. So, I mean, those are the two primary factors that create this tension in employment with age discrimination. But then you still see, just paradigms about the way people work or how we relate to one another that's based on stereotypes, that are premised in age. I mean, in the administrative or executive assistant world, you could almost tell anybody who's over 50, you're probably not going to get a job, a new job, or start off in that world because of this idea that job is encumbered by a young female.
Right.
So, I mean, age discrimination, it remains, I think, as prevalent as it was at the time the Age Discrimination and Employment Act was passed by Congress. And I think that we just don't do better in those terms, and we need these laws to protect our citizens and ensure that they have access to opportunities to take care of themselves.
And let me tell you what's so interesting about what you're saying. So when I teach career advancement and people writing resumes, I try to just tell them some things. Do not put that you have 25 years experience, right? But it's almost kind of impossible to not reveal, how many years of experience or when you came out of college, and trying to teach them, because that is a discriminator. It could be a discriminator. Yeah. And they're like, okay, you have 25 years. Let's just say, you graduated from college at 21, so they start doing that math, and we know that on the job application, they ask certain things.
Right.
And those things really lead to your age, which could cause some problems.
There's a practical aspect of just getting employed. I mean, America is really hurting itself because, study after study after study, both in the private sector and the public sector, have shown that when you have a diversity of people, and that doesn't mean just race, that means experiences, which comes with age.
Yes.
It comes with different backgrounds. It comes from being from different places.
Yes.
That's where innovation is born. That's where America is better. That's where the bottom line expands. That's where dollars are earned. But it's like we shoot our, what do they say? Cut your nose off to spite your face.
Exactly.
Because we have these ridiculous, antiquated, for lack of a better word, just stupid, notions, of who people are or what they may be based on immutable characteristics that continue to handicap us as a country. And I think we're beginning to see the effects of that and what has occurred over the years. So sure, you tell people, don't say you have 25 years of experience, but how many jobs are there where that is really an important factor, of what you can bring to the situation? Or you tell someone whose name is Akilah Michelle, put a Michelle, instead of Akilah, when, what does that have to do
with anything?
With the experience or the background, that, people can bring. I mean, my younger son's name is Ramesses Hakeem Gaines. I mean, he's obviously going to be on the no-fly list. But I mean, he's, a brilliant, scientifically, mathematically minded, young man who's, a fantastic scholar. So, I mean, his name means wise and judicious and the king of the sun. Yeah. What does that have to do with, his... So, I mean, we hurt ourselves as Americans, but, I mean, that is an actual practical, functional aspect of the employment sector.
Exactly. And Melinda?
No, yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think I think in some ways it may be one of the more difficult
Yes.
one of the more difficult protected classes to sort of file under, because as Eden said, I think an agency, a company can always find some sort of business reason to explain why this particular employee who happened to be over the age of 40 was treated in a particular way. I think, and I don't know, Eden may have a better perspective working on the private side, but I always found that, or at least I think that perhaps there needs to be a little bit of amendment to the law, because the over 40 thing, I think in some ways minimizes the impact of the law, right? I mean, I don't know of any 42-year-old being discriminated for being 42.
Right.
I could be wrong, right?
Exactly.
It seems maybe over 50, over 55. I mean, I don't know what the right number is.
You know
Right.
what I think that is? I think as we age, we think that now, we're all over 40, right? We're like, okay, so
were saying.
what is that? Right?
What is that?
And then,
Exactly.
then when you get over 50, you like, what is the big deal? What is that? I'm going to need you to make the number 60.
Well, I think it depends on the discipline. I mean, you
Right.
see different trends
Yes.
in different industries, like different categories of jobs. So where for some 40 is, considered old. In the tech world, 40 can be old.
Right,
In
exactly.
the IT world, that could be you getting up there, because everybody wants the young, kids that are just out of college, who are innovative in technology, who can be taught the easiest. So, I mean, someone who's 40, who's Facebook instead of Instagram,
Right.
could be seen as somebody.
And the whole notion, look, wait a minute, the whole notion that you even said Instagram dates you because it's IG.
My fault. I think it's Snapchat now.
Yes,
anyway.
yes.
No, and you don't even need see
The gram.
Let me educate y'all. It's not even, you don't say the whole Snapchat. You just say Snap.
Oh, okay.
So look, we have
See?
a caller. We have a caller. So let's take this call. Hello, caller. Welcome to Sisters and Company.
Hi, this is Walita. How are you, ladies?
We're doing wonderful, Walita. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm listening to the show as I'm traveling, and I may have missed this point, but I wanted to ask the ladies a question about what do they recommend that you do if you feel that you are being discriminated against because of age when applying for jobs within the federal government.
Great question.
First, I would maybe go and talk to a lawyer and do a consultation because all of the agencies, and Melinda could probably talk a little bit about their requirements for statistics and keeping applicant flow data is what we call it. And it very well it may be the case that you had been discriminated against, and it can be difficult on your own to get the information that you need to kind of get behind the curtain to see who was hired, whether that person was more qualified or not. So, I mean, sometimes access to applicant flow data helps. And I mean, these are the kinds of things that you would need when you're talking about being an applicant who's been discriminated against. You would really need an attorney's assistance to kind of figure out like what really happened and if that in fact was the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's about the only place to really start, because unless you have some sort of insider knowledge, like let's say it's the agency or the company that you work for, and you know who was selected and you know whether or not they were more qualified or not, it can be difficult to uncover the evidence that you need. And so an attorney would know which types of requests and various avenues to find to get some of the statistical data that may shed some light on that.
Right, because
Okay.
and if you don't have the information, then it's like you said, just going to be difficult for you on your own as an employee to get that information.
But you can also
And you also don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And that's why you get an attorney.
Right, exactly.
I think it also starts with that gut feeling, though, because there's sometimes there are things that
Yes.
occur in the interview that give you those
Yes.
clues as
Yes.
to what the people are thinking. Because, for example, if there wasn't information about your age, and this
Yes.
could extend to race or other issues on the resume, often people will call you in who harbor this animus, and then when they they see you, sometimes there's a detachment in the interview. They're not talking to you. They're not engaging with you. They're kind of like, oh, it's only like a 10-minute interview. They're not, behaving as if, there's a good exchange. So sometimes your gut tells you because you thought, that was interesting. Everybody who interviewed me was 20 and, I'm 45 and they just didn't engage me. They weren't asking me the kinds of questions that I think they might have asked based on my resume and the nature of the job. So, I mean, if your gut is telling you that there's an issue, you should go with that and then seek, legal advice.
And did you all see the movie The Intern with Robert De Niro?
Okay.
So I'm sorry, Walida. Thank you. I forgot you were on the phone. You were so quiet. Sorry.
Okay.
Safe travels.
All right,
Thanks for
bye-bye.
calling in. But in the movie The Intern with Robert De Niro, I don't want to give it away, but watch that movie because it really speaks to what you were just talking about. You have these young folks running this young organization, but they knew that it was important to bring in some seniors, just to have the experience and some mentorship. And some of the questions that they were asking, it just made me cringe. And just some of the things that they said just made me cringe. And so the seniors kind of went with it because, they're thinking this is going to get us out the house. We've been retired. It's going to give us, an opportunity to connect with younger folk. But what you just said, it resonated when you watched that particular movie.
So
Exactly.
let's, because of course time is going by
Yes.
very quickly. So I want to do a shift to the political talk because I can't help but to think about all of the licensed attorneys who went before Congress, wasn't truthful, people ignoring the law. They say turn over the tax returns, and you decide that I'm not going to do that because for whatever reasons. So let's talk about that. So if you all were,
Can I ask you a different question?
Yes.
One of the commentary that's out there about Kamala Harris, we know that she was a prosecuting attorney, and I know that's not your. Can you kind of explain to people if you have some knowledge about that? What is it that people are so hesitant about regarding her? Because she was a prosecutor in California, and I'm thinking a prosecutor doing her job. So what are your thoughts about the commentary that's out there about what she did?
I think it's twofold. I think, on the one hand, people have to understand, regardless of our race, she's a prosecutor. She has a job to do. And the job of a prosecutor is to bring people to justice. From what I understand, I'm not that familiar with her background. From what I understand of the commentary is that I think there's an expectation that because she is a woman of color, that she would have done it, and when she was a prosecutor, she would have done it in such a way where I guess she showed a bit of empathy, a bit of being a progressive.
Okay.
And apparently, if you looking at her track record, she was gung-ho and maybe contributed to an increased incarceration of African American men.
Okay.
That's what I understand from those individuals who have who have an issue with her record as a prosecutor. But I will tell you, having worked for the government, being perceived as on the side of management, having been a prosecutor.
Right. I was going to ask you that.
I mean, sometimes
Yes.
you walk into the door and there's just an automatic, you work for the enemy.
Yes.
And so sometimes that can be hard to overcome when you choose not to work on the defense side of things. But I don't know enough about her background and her record to speak up much more than that. I don't know if you know more about her.
Actually, the New York Times ran an excellent article about this issue maybe a couple of months ago. So, I mean, I think in the context of what is going on in our political discourse,
Yes.
it's an interesting conversation because, I mean, I think almost anybody in the field of 20 to, I don't know how many it is now, some odd Democrats who have thrown their hat in, that almost any of them could look like Jesus Christ in comparison to the president that we have now and his background and his history and the things that he has done. So, I mean, I don't say this to say that we shouldn't be, vetting candidates and evaluating their credentials and their experiences, because obviously the failure to do that has led us into this morass that we are living in now. But, I mean, I do say that it's interesting to me that her background has become such
Right.
a hot topic
Yes.
when, what we're seeing before us in the office of the president is not, is almost ignored,
Right.
that, I mean, I'm not sure what you could or couldn't do at this point if he is the benchmark or the baseline for now being the leader of our country. But that being said, obviously we don't want to go back there. We want to make some serious changes when we vote in 2020 and get our nation back on a different track. So Kamala Harris, as Melinda said, I mean, it basically wraps up to, being prosecuting in a way that was detrimental to the African American community. She has actually spoken to some of the issues issues. For example, she was the proponent of a truancy program that
Yes.
resulted in a lot of African Americans being locked up because their kids weren't in school. And she had explained that she did a study, and it showed that a lot of crime was being committed at certain times of the day, and I believe particularly with young people. And they deduced that part of the reason is because the young people weren't in school. And so their solution to that was to enact this truancy law, and perhaps it was done in a heavy-handed, non-case by case way that resulted in disproportionately African Americans being caught up in that. And so, I mean, she kind of explained that, and that was an explanation. There are some things that she hasn't explained. I read about two instances, one in particular where a gentleman had been pro se in the trial court and didn't raise a particular issue that related to his being innocent. And I believe that there was something about the case that made it clear to both the prosecution and the defense that this man was innocent. And the case went up on appeal, and the Ninth Circuit, in fact, had suggested that the prosecutors mediate the case. And those who were watching the case believed that that was a signal that the Ninth Circuit wanted them to settle it because the man was, in fact, innocent. And under Kamala Harris's under her, I think she was the Attorney General at the time, she encouraged the prosecutors to go forward to argue that he had not raised this technicality below. And if you don't raise it below, you technically waive it. And so apparently this man is sitting in jail while everyone knows he's innocent. And that's abhorrent to me.
Yes.
The problem I have with the court system is that, you know, we are agenda based, and we move away from the facts and the law. And people, you know, it depends on what you look like, who you are, what your socioeconomic background is, you know, as to whether or not we'll actually apply the law. Right. You know, I have a lot of clients ask me, here are the facts, this is the law, can I win this case? And I have to say, I have no idea, because it depends on the judge you're going to get.
Right, exactly.
You know, in the true world, in the real world, you should win this case and be successful because the law has been broken. But when a judge looks at you, he's going to see a black man, he's going to see a black woman, he's going to see a Muslim, he's going to see, you know, somebody who doesn't fit the mold of the structure. So, I mean, I take issue with what Kamala Harris did in that case, because I want us to hold ourselves to a higher standard. I want us to do the right thing even when it's difficult. I don't want to see somebody who's innocent, you know, go to jail, and maybe I'm naive about that. So, I mean, I think that she has things that she needs to speak to in what she did as a prosecutor. Do I think that makes her a poor candidate for president? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that she wouldn't be capable of governing in a way that respects all races, colors, creeds? I don't think so. I mean, I think her background as an Indian American as well as an African American speaks to, you know, just kind of an understanding of diversity of culture. I mean, have I decided to support her yet? I don't know. I haven't decided yet. You know, there's so many people out there who are part of the mix. I would like to be able to ultimately, as a black woman, support another black woman. But I don't think she should be held to a higher standard than anybody else, you know, based on that record. I think it's something that's worthy of discussion. But, you know, for me, there's nothing that's been said that, you know, knocks her out of the game as far as I'm concerned.
And you actually said something profound. And this is what people have to understand. Judges.
Right.
And right now, judges, they're being stacked in the courts. And that is a large part of our problems if we have to face criminal cases.
And I think going back to sort of my original lesson, being a prosecutor, that Kamala may have missed along the way, and I think most lawyers miss, there is no class in law school. That's sort of the social work aspect of it. And I think so many lawyers get into it just for the win and the technicalities and how brilliantly can I articulate this case or get around this statute, that many have lost sort of the element point. You know, if I were fixing the world, I mean, I think law school should encompass work on social work, because I think it would make our approach to the law would certainly be different in how we dealt with people. And I think even though I work for the government, I mean, that's an element that I try to bring to the job that I have and the managers that I work for and with. And I tell them, look, if an employee calls here and tells me my manager did X and Y, and I have an inkling that you committed discrimination, understand that you're not my client, the government is, and now we're coming after you. And so I think if lawyers, regardless of what side you were on, if we actually held true to our defend the law and defend the Constitution, or, you know, in the federal government sense, represent your agency, that actually wouldn't be difficult to do if you understood what that really meant. And so perhaps she lost her way and got wrapped up in sort of the sense of winning and the technicality of it, and did not tap into sort of the empathy side. But I think we all grow as people.
Yes.
And I think for me, if she acknowledges it, I don't. Again, I agree with Eden. I think it's ridiculous that this has become what we
issue,
talk about
yes.
when there's so many other issues we should be talking about.
Yes.
And so I think she deserves a fair chance to explain it and to move on like everyone else has.
Yes.
I want to hear what Julian Castro has to say about reparations, because
Yeah.
I'm for that.
Yeah, exactly. And so we know we have less than a minute, but I really wanted to dig into the EEO because you talked about that equal employment opportunity and commission. And so, how do you all work with them? Because I know you work for the federal government, you're in private practice, and just getting people to understand what that process is like. And maybe we'll have to come back for a part 2 to talk about that.
Exactly.
Because like you said, people, that's the first thing they do on the job. They file an EEO complaint. And so maybe you all will come back and we can have that more in-depth conversation.
And I would love to go into the discussion about being a manager when somebody filed an EEO complaint against you.
Yes.
How you handle that.
Yes, exactly.
You're not a real manager till you get one.
Tell me, shoot their best shot.
I mean, I think in that case, when discrimination isn't afoot, it's actually readily and easily resolved
Right.
at a low
Right.
level.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
I think when discrimination is afoot, that's when we have issues. But I mean, I've worked with many managers in the federal government where there is a misunderstanding or a miscommunication, or something just went wrong in the system, and so people go to EEO to file as a means to resolve the problem. And where the managers had no discriminatory motive, everybody was able to sit down, come to the table, talk about how to resolve this,
Exactly.
and it stopped at a low level.
Right.
But where people were actually making decisions based on immutable characteristics, then people become more intransigent. They try to
Yes.
pretend that it's about something else, but
Right.
it often isn't.
Right.
So time went by quickly.
Yes, it did. What
So
a great
we would like to,
conversation.
yes, definitely thank Eden and Melinda, and maybe you all could clear your schedules to come back for a part 2.
Yes.
I think that would be great.
Exactly.
We want to thank our audience for tuning in, hanging in here with us week after week after week. We appreciate your
thank you
support.
all.
We appreciate your questions. Have a great afternoon. We will see you next week. And next week we have...
We don't know yet because it's Easter, so
Oh,
we may
yeah.
just talk about some traditions and things like that because I didn't want to
Okay.
invite anybody for Easter because
Right.
that seems to be a sacred
family
time
day.
and family
Yes.
time. Exactly.
Okay.
Go
so
Hoos.
we'll see you. Bye.
Yes, thank you all for tuning.
Welcome to Sisters in